The red and blue lights painted my front yard in alternating flashes as 3 police cruisers pulled into our quiet cul-de-sac on Maple Grove Court. Patricia Garrison stood in the middle of the street, her arms waving frantically as she directed the officers toward my house. Her voice carried across the neighborhood with a shrill intensity. "There he is. That's the man who attacked my guests. I want him arrested immediately." I stood on my porch, security camera footage already pulled up on my phone, watching as 2 officers approached. My hands remained calm at my sides, though inside I felt a mixture of annoyance and anticipation. Patricia had no idea what she'd just walked into. When I moved to this neighborhood 6 months ago, I thought I'd found the perfect place to settle down after years of apartment living. The houses were well maintained, the lawns pristine, and the community seemed peaceful. What I didn't realize was that this tranquility came at a price. Specifically, the iron-fisted rule of Patricia Garrison, the HOA president who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Patricia lived 3 houses down from me, in a 2-story colonial with perfectly trimmed hedges and a lawn that looked like it belonged on a golf course. She introduced herself on my second day, clipboard in hand, reminding me about grass height regulations and approved mailbox colors. I smiled, nodded, and figured I could handle a little micromanagement if it meant living in such a nice area. The problem started about 2 months after I moved in. Patricia began hosting what she called community gatherings every weekend. These weren't official HOA events, just Patricia's personal parties that she claimed were for building neighborhood bonds. The issue was that she'd set up her gatherings in the common area behind our houses, but her guests consistently spilled over onto private property, particularly mine since my backyard connected directly to the communal space. At first, I tried to be neighborly about it. When I found beer cans in my garden and cigarette butts near my patio furniture, I simply cleaned them up. When her guests started using my driveway as overflow parking, blocking my garage, I politely asked them to move. But things escalated quickly. One Saturday evening, I came home to find Patricia's friends had set up a volleyball net that extended well into my backyard. They'd trampled my newly planted flower bed and someone had knocked over my bird bath. I walked over to Patricia, who was holding court near a folding table loaded with snacks. "Patricia, your volleyball net is on my property, and someone's damaged my garden," I said, keeping my voice level. She barely glanced at me, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud, David. We're all neighbors here. A little community spirit never hurt anyone." "I understand, but this is private property. I need your guests to stay in the common area." Her face flushed slightly, but she maintained her fake smile. "Well, I'm the HOA president, and I say it's fine. The boundaries aren't that clear anyway." That night, I installed security cameras covering my entire backyard and driveway. I also put up clear, private property, no trespassing signs along my property line. If Patricia wanted to play games, I'd make sure I had everything documented. The next weekend, her party was even larger. Despite my signs, her guests wandered freely onto my property. One couple decided my patio furniture looked more comfortable than the folding chairs Patricia had provided. Another group used my garden hose to fill their cooler without asking. I recorded everything. Monday morning, I sent Patricia a formal letter via certified mail, clearly stating that she and her guests were no longer permitted on my property. I included screenshots from my security footage showing the trespassing and property damage. I copied the HOA board and kept records of everything. Her response came swift and venomous. She showed up at my door that evening, letter crumpled in her fist. "How dare you threaten me with legal action? I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. I know every rule, every regulation, and you cannot ban residents from community activities." "Patricia, I'm not banning anyone from community activities. I'm banning them from my private property. There's a significant difference." Her face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You'll regret this, David. I promise you that." The following Saturday, I watched from my window as Patricia set up for another party. She made a big show of pointing out my signs to her guests, rolling her eyes dramatically. I noticed several people looking uncomfortable, but Patricia's force of personality seemed to override their concerns. Around 7 in the evening, I heard a crash from my backyard. On my security monitor, I watched as 3 of Patricia's guests had not only entered my property but had knocked over my new ceramic planter while trying to retrieve a frisbee. They laughed it off and continued playing, now using my yard as part of their game area. I walked outside and addressed them directly. "Excuse me, you're on private property. Please leave immediately." One of them, a man in his 40s wearing a Hawaiian shirt, smirked at me. "Patricia said you were uptight. Come on, man, we're just having fun." "Fun or not, you're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll call the police." They grumbled but eventually moved back to the common area. I could see Patricia watching from across the yard, her lips pursed in satisfaction. She'd obviously told them to test my boundaries. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing on my cameras. While I'd been dealing with the frisbee players, 2 other guests had entered through my side gate, clearly marked with a private property sign, and were near my garage. One appeared to be trying the handle. I immediately confronted them. "What are you doing by my garage?" The woman jumped, startled. "Oh. Patricia said you had folding chairs we could borrow." "Patricia has no authority to offer my property to anyone. You're trespassing, and I have you on camera attempting to enter my garage. Leave immediately." They scattered quickly, but the damage was done. Patricia had escalated from simple boundary pushing to actively encouraging criminal behavior. I spent the rest of the evening saving and backing up all my security footage. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers standing on my porch. My stomach tightened, but I remained calm as I opened the door. "David Lawson?" the older officer asked. "Yes, that's me. We received a complaint that you threatened and assaulted guests at a community event last night. We need to ask you some questions." I almost laughed at the absurdity but maintained my composure. "Officers, I have security footage of everything that occurred last night. Would you like to see it?" The younger officer nodded. "That would be helpful, sir." I invited them in and pulled up the footage on my laptop. As they watched, their expressions shifted from neutral to concerned. The evidence was crystal clear: trespassing, property damage, and attempted breaking and entering. "Mr. Lawson," the older officer said, "it appears you're the victim here, not the perpetrator. The person who called specifically said you physically assaulted her guests." "That's completely false. As you can see, I never touched anyone. I verbally asked them to leave my property, which is my legal right." The officers exchanged glances. "We're going to need to speak with the complainant. Do you want to press charges for the trespassing and attempted burglary?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. I watched from my window as the officers walked to Patricia's house. She answered the door with dramatic flair, no doubt ready to spin her tale of victimhood. But as the officers began questioning her, I saw her confident posture begin to wilt. 20 minutes later, she was being escorted to one of the police cars, her face a mask of shock and indignation. The officers returned to get my full statement and copies of the security footage. "Ms. Garrison is being charged with filing a false police report," the older officer explained. "The trespassing charges will be filed against the individuals identified in your footage. We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to complete the formal complaints." As the police cars pulled away with Patricia in the back of one, neighbors began emerging from their houses. The spectacle of their HOA president being arrested was too compelling to miss. Over the next weeks, the full extent of Patricia's deceptions unraveled. The district attorney's office took the false police report charge seriously, especially given the clear video evidence. Patricia hired an expensive lawyer, but the footage was undeniable. At her hearing, Patricia tried to maintain that she had implicit authority as HOA president to authorize use of any property in the neighborhood. The judge shut that down immediately, calling her interpretation legally baseless and deliberately deceptive. She was found guilty of filing a false police report, a misdemeanor that came with a $5,000 fine and 100 hours of community service. But that was just the beginning of her downfall. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. I attended, along with most of the neighborhood. One by one, neighbors began speaking up about Patricia's overreach and abuse of power. It turned out I wasn't the only one she'd terrorized, just the first to fight back with evidence. The vote to remove her as president was unanimous. Patricia sat in stunned silence as the board also voted to ban her from holding any HOA position for 10 years. Her face cycled through shades of red and white as the reality sank in. But the worst was yet to come. Patricia worked as a real estate agent, and news of her arrest and conviction spread quickly through professional circles. Her broker called her into a meeting the following Monday. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she'd been placed on indefinite suspension pending a review by the State Real Estate Commission. Apparently, being convicted of making false statements to law enforcement raised serious questions about her trustworthiness, a fatal flaw in a profession built on trust. 3 weeks after the arrest, a quiet knock came at my door. A woman I recognized from the security footage stood on my porch, looking embarrassed. "Mr. Lawson? I'm Sarah Chen. I was one of the people at Patricia's party. I wanted to apologize. We had no idea we were on private property." Patricia told us the entire back area, including parts of the adjoining yards, was designated community space for HOA events. "She told you that?" I asked, though I wasn't entirely surprised. Sarah nodded, wringing her hands. She even showed us what she claimed were official HOA maps. Now I realize she probably fabricated them. Several of us feel terrible about what happened. We never would have entered your property if we'd known the truth. As Sarah left, I realized the full scope of Patricia's manipulations. She hadn't just abused her power, she'd built an elaborate fiction to justify her behavior, dragging innocent people into her schemes. The final blow came when Patricia received the bill for her legal defense, $32,000 in attorney fees for a case she lost. Combined with the $5,000 fine and the loss of her real estate income, she faced financial ruin. I saw her the day after the bill arrived, standing in her driveway, looking at her house with hollow eyes. The empire she'd built on lies and intimidation had crumbled completely. Her husband quietly listed their house for sale 2 months later. The last time I saw Patricia, she was directing movers as they loaded a truck. She caught my eye for a moment, and I saw something I'd never seen before: defeat. The woman who'd terrorized an entire neighborhood with her petty tyranny was leaving in disgrace, her reputation destroyed and her finances in ruins. As the moving truck pulled away, I felt no satisfaction, only relief. The neighborhood could finally heal from years of her oppressive rule. And all it took was someone willing to stand up, document the truth, and refuse to be bullied. The new HOA president sent out a newsletter the following week, emphasizing respect for private property and the actual limits of HOA authority. Peace returned to Maple Grove Court, this time without the iron fist that had maintained it before. Patricia Garrison learned the hard way that no amount of perceived authority gives you the right to trample on others' rights. Her $5,000 fine and criminal record would forever remind her of the day she called the cops on the wrong neighbor.